Like me, you probably come to this show each week with the mindset of how to become a more effective leader yourself. But today's guest is a former nuclear submarine commander and has a different message for us. And that message is, it's not about you. On today's episode, how to turn followers into leaders. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 241.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made. And this weekly show will give you access to the best thinkers, resources, and actions to develop your leadership skills. And not only do we have the best thinkers on the show, but we also have folks who have taken real practical action to put practical leadership into place and produce great results, not only for the organization, but for the people involved in the organization. And today's guest is just a fabulous example of that. He's got a great story, and the story is not just about organizational results, but it's a story about people and what great things people have done. And I first came across David Marquet from one of our mastermind members who's used a number of David's principles in order to lead his organization. And David was a captain in the United States Navy of the submarine USS Santa Fe. And at the time he assumed command, it was the worst performing submarine in the fleet. Under his leadership, it achieved the highest retention and operational standards in the Navy. When Stephen Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, spent time aboard the ship, he called it the most empowering organization he'd ever seen. David has since retired from the Navy and is the best-selling author of Turn the Ship Around, and Fortune magazine called it the #1 must-read business book of the year. David, I'm really fascinated by your story, and from the very beginning, you weren't even supposed to be the captain of the Santa Fe, right?
That's right. So sometimes the things that come along unexpectedly are sometimes the best things that happen to you.
Yeah, it's really interesting how things work that way. And I'm wondering if you can take me back now to that time right before you assumed command of the Santa Fe, and what was your career like in the Navy leading up to that and that time of preparing to be a captain?
I was in the Naval Academy. I was doing well in the submarine force. I was being promoted. I had been selected to be the captain of a nuclear submarine, which of course was a huge deal for me personally because this was sort of what I aspired to. And the leadership model that I adhered to up to this point was basically what we were taught, which is good leaders give good orders, great leaders give great orders. So I was assigned to be the captain of another ship. I went to school for 12 months, which is what the Navy does. So you learn every detail of the ship to allow you to be these know-all, tell-all leaders. And at the very last minute, the captain on the Santa Fe quit a year early. He was supposed to be there for another year. And so the Navy says, well, we can't have a submarine no captain. And he quit because the ship wasn't doing well at the bottom of the fleet in terms of retention, morale, and performance. And to his credit, he recognized, I'm not helping this situation. I'm going to get out of the way. And so the Navy said, well, Marquet, you're going to the Santa Fe instead of his other ship. At the very, very last minute, it's 2 weeks to go.
Oh, wow.
And so I had 2 weeks to prepare. I had 12 months. Normally you get ready in 12 months. And I had 2 weeks. And oh, by the way, the Santa Fe was a different kind of submarine. It has one of the newest submarines in the fleet, and all the equipment was different, had a different reactor plant, had, different weapons. So it was all different. And that was really the scariest part. I go down on board the very first time. I'm looking at the gear, and it's like all, Greek to me. But still, the crew wanted to be told what to do, and I wanted to tell them what to do. So we're sort of in this unhappy but scary place. And very early on, I gave an order which couldn't be followed, because it's just the technical design of the ship. It was like shifting into fifth gear on a car with 4 gears. But the officer actually ordered it. And when I asked him, I say, why did you do that? Did you know? He said, yeah, I knew. I said, well, why did you do it? Because you told me to. And it really started me thinking about everything that I thought about leadership. And I now, like where I live now, is that great leaders don't give orders. good leaders give good orders, but great leaders don't give any orders, because I built a team that doesn't need to be told what to do. And I kind of went down this path of telling my guys, I got to stop telling you what to do. My instinct was to have it be out there. Hey, you guys need to take more initiative. You guys need to have more empowerment. You guys need to be more proactive. And finally, someone shined the light back on my face and said, well, Captain, it's really you. You need to be quiet. I said, and I realized this was right. Too many times leaders think the problem is out there as opposed to in their own heads. And so what I could do was keep my mouth shut. And I'm telling you, that's hard. When you think you know the answer and you guys come up to you and say, hey, what should we do here? And you want to say, well, turn left, or update the software, or, boom, then stuff is happening. Man, that feels good. But I would say, well, what do you think? What should we do? What if I weren't here? What do you intend to do? And we practiced changing the words we use. So we said, I intend to, instead of request permission. We basically, we outlawed the words request permission.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me from your story as I read through it if there's any place in leadership where you think about being more command and control, it would be the captain of a nuclear-powered submarine of issuing orders. Right. And so what was so interesting to me is you basically stopped giving orders, and you made this distinction between, I can't remember if you did this publicly or you're just in your own thinking of authority, who has authority versus who has information. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the thing about not giving orders, that was a public agreement that we made, and because we didn't know, I was going to go down this path, which I didn't really know where we'd end up, and I needed the crew to agree that that's what they wanted to do. What happened, Dave, was there was a lot of mess, there was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of trying stuff, there was a lot of success, there were some failures. But in the end, we had great success, and not only for the ship and what happened while we were there, but in the long run, over the next 10, 15 years, creating more leaders. And so when I sat down to write the book, I had to think, well, what did we actually do? And I went back and interviewed the crew. And so a lot of the stuff that you read in the book is really, it's after the fact architecture that's laid into what we did, and this idea of information and authority was one of them. So you can think about most organizations, the guys at the front line, right? The coders, the front desk at the hotel, the waiter standing at the table, the salesman standing in the office. The people at the front line have the information, but they don't have the authority. So they have to go back, up the chain, fill up a form to get permission to do something. And so there's a gap between information and authority. This is the typical approach. And what we said was, we're going to push the authority down to where the information is. So when I got to the ship, the second in command had to sign the vacation form. So sailors were routing their forms up to the second in command. This is what Navy regulations tells you to do. There's 6 levels, right? And so there's a gap between who has the information, the supervisors who are the immediate supervisors of the sailors, and then the authority, which rests at the top. And so we channel information to authority. We do it using computer programs, forms, stoplight charts, and that kind of thing. And we decided that to do the opposite. Rather than trying to push information to authority, we would push the information, or we would push the authority for making decisions down to the guys who naturally had the information. And this is a little bit scary, but it ended up being super powerful because now those guys actually had authority, they had a responsibility, they were involved, their brains had to kick into gear. And we talk about engagement. And there's all this stuff about, do the following 17 things of engaged employees. You only need to do one thing for engaged employees: give them decision-making authority. Everything else is window dressing.
Oh, fabulous. I saw you online on a video and a talk you had given to, it looked like a military audience, and you were talking about this process you went through of really giving authority to the folks who had the information. And you mentioned in that talk that that was not only is that a big change for the organization, that was a change for you, that you like giving orders. You like that control. And so I'm just curious, like, what did you do for yourself? Where did you struggle with this? And what did you ultimately do for yourself as a leader to get beyond this framework that, like you said, you learned for years and years?
Right. So this is not a decision that it's like quitting smoking. Like, you don't say, oh, today you quit. It's like every day you got to make the decision not to give orders. And so there's a couple things you can do, because when everything's fine and everything's, going along well and smooth sailing, then it's easy to say, oh, hey, what do you guys think? And, this is on you. You guys tell me, if you had to make this decision, what would you do? But it's when times get tough and the stress happens that we go back into our limbic system, we go back into our old ways, we just want to bark orders. And so there's a couple things. Number one, you got to give people permission to give you feedback and tell you when you're falling back into that role. And so, I gave my guys permission to tell me when I was not living up to the kind of leadership behavior that I wanted to. Now, I'll tell you, the first couple of times that you're under stress, that's why you're acting badly. And then they say, Captain, you're acting badly. And you don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
You want to know what stress does to people? Watch the clips on the Super Bowl and see how Cam Newton responds, right? There was nothing physically wrong. The guy's a fabulous athlete, but it's all in his head, right? They got to him. He has stress, and then he's flopping on the ground like a toddler. He's pouting at the thing afterwards. That's all because of the stress that's happened to him. And so, Cam, you need someone to tell you, hey, you're going down this path. You're going down to the basement, and you need someone to throw like a behavior red card at you and snap you out of it. So you got to give people permission around you to give you feedback. It's a key thing. You got to be overt and public about, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm going to struggle with it, and I need you to help me. And I need you to tell me, in a polite and respectful way, hey, I'm not living up to it, or I'm barking orders again.
Well, and I'm imagining that, especially the first couple of times that someone has the courage to do that, how you respond as a leader in those first few interactions, the first few times publicly, really does make a difference and set a tone for the organization. Yeah, right. I mean, the first time you chew someone's head off because they're telling you, hey, you're telling us what to do here. You're not giving us a chance to think. It's going to be the last time to do that. So, the biggest enemy is always you. I also had a poster which tried to remind me that you just really need to be consistent. And as a leader, often it would feel like, God, I've said this 100 times, yeah, and I would get frustrated. For example, I would tell my guys, if you want to, in the Navy, there's this a very elaborate qualification program, and if you want to stand a watch or go to higher levels of responsibility, there's a whole process. You take a test and all this stuff. But there were also rules that said things like you needed to be like 5 years in the Navy before you could reach this level. And I told my guys, and I had the authority to waive those requirements as the captain. I said, look, if you're ready in all respects, I don't care how much time you had in the Navy, I will waive that. Okay, I'm not going to be the guy who holds you up. You are. And I swear to God, I was there for a year, and I've been singing the song for a year, and then I heard these guys in the passageway, well, they won't let you do that. First of all, I used the word they, which was a no-no also. We use the word we. They won't let you do that because you don't have 5 years in the Navy. And I blew up. But from your perspective, leaders, you may be saying it 50 times, but don't forget, there's like new people coming in the organization. And these old habits, man, they die hard. So I had a poster which had just like 8 frames of me telling my dog to sit, and the dog standing in front of the ninth frame. The dog is sitting. And the idea was, you got to go through all 8 frames, man. Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned this, because it's one of the things I hear from leaders a lot is I keep saying the same thing. I keep saying the same thing and people aren't getting it. And we'll have a conversation about, well, how many times have you actually had that conversation? Oh, I sent an email and then I made a phone call. I'm like, well, you're not anywhere close to going through those 8 or 9 steps. I was really interested in how you framed and your team framed just language on the ship. And one of the phrases that it sounds like was really central to the language that was used on the ship was the phrase, "I intend to." I was wondering if you could tell us more about how that came about and how you got your team doing that.
Right. So let's go back to the story. So I give the order, right? You can't do it. I make a deal. I'm not going to give you guys any more orders.
Wait, hang on just a second here. So you gave an order the second day you were on the ship to do something that the ship physically couldn't do, right?
It was the first day we were underway, which was about 2 weeks after I got there. But yes. And so we made this deal that I wasn't going to give them any more orders. Well, you can't replace something with nothing, right? And so there was like, well, what do we say? How's it going to work? And so I just, and the words that we were used to use would be, generally, that was like request permission to, or worse, hey, here's a problem. What do you want me to do? Stuff like that. But, generally it was kind of like request permission. That was the general sort of way we worked. And I said, replace request permission, global replace all with I intend to, because I needed to give them words to say. I didn't have, we were at sea. The reactor was shut down. We were submerged out in the Pacific. We didn't have time for a change management process, right? And so the guys go back to work and they start saying, I intend to. And initially, it kind of half felt like they were living it, but their psychological ownership goes to the person who says, I intend to do this. And if you don't say no, I'm doing it. Right. And the organization moves forward. So now in my company, people say, Captain, Captain, sorry. They don't have to call me Captain.
On the days they really like you, they call you Captain, right?
Yeah. I got a couple of guys on the ship who are working for me, and they like to call me Captain. But anyway, David, I intend to give a discount to this client. I intend to, whatever it is. And if I'm on an airplane, if I don't check my email for that 24 hours, whatever it is, it happens, right? They're not sitting there waiting for permission. That's the big difference. Like, it happens. So it was hugely powerful, and so I became convinced to ignore all the sort of mumbo jumbo about trying to convince people to think a different way or any of that stuff. I just said, we're going to change our language. We're going to say, and another one was, we're going to say I intend to instead of request permission. Another one was, I said we're going to say we. We had all these theys on the Santa Fe, like engineering was they, ops, supply. The chiefs were they to the officers. So there's hierarchy they, and there's organizational they, stovepipe they. So they just have to say we. And what happened was we felt like a team. We felt, people would say it was the most powerful culture of teamwork they'd ever seen. It had nothing to do with anything we did other than just say, we're going to say the word we. Because what happened was we changed our wiring in our brains. When you say we, you can't blame the guy over in marketing. It's like, we didn't prepare for the meeting. It's no blame. You just move forward.
Yeah, everyone's in it together, and you literally are on a ship, of course, and really in organizations too, in almost every case. And see, you all went through this process of doing this, and like you said, it started off, it didn't feel as genuine as you began it, but you went from this place where you're underway for the first time, and you give an order that people couldn't follow, and people just repeat the order and don't say anything.
Yeah.
I was interested in the story you told later on in your command of the SEAL team and how you guys were meeting the SEAL team and how it rolled out very differently than it was when that first day you guys were underway.
Right. So this is when I knew that we'd really had gotten over the hill. And so the ship is on the surface. It's the middle of the night, no moon, very dark. And we're picking up the SEAL team that's coming off the coast in a Zodiac. And you don't communicate with the radio because that gives your position away. I mean, anyone can intercept it. And so it's all happening basically in the blind. They're going to an X in the ocean. We're going to the X in the ocean. Now, I got a nuclear submarine, right? So if they don't show up, I'm still going to live, but they're going to be stranded in the middle of the ocean in a Zodiac.
Right.
So it's important that we're in the right place. So what happened was we ended up in water that was a little bit shallower than we expected. And so we set a tripwire. And I went running into the control room when the tripwire got set. And I glanced up at the screen, and it looked like we were moving towards shallower water, which is, consistent with hitting this tripwire. And the officer of the deck, so this is the guy who's actually giving the orders to drive the ship, has ordered the ship to move ahead slowly. And I look at this arrow, and it looks like that he's going to drive us more into shallow water. And I kind of blurt out, "No, we need to back up." And immediately, when the younger crewman says, "No, Captain, you're wrong." And I stopped, I kept my mouth shut, and I looked at the screen, and very quickly the little arrow got short and stopped and reversed and went in the other direction. In other words, the submarine was actually pointed toward deep water, but we were being pushed backwards. But in the confusion of running into the control room, I thought that we were pointed toward the shallower water. And so what they had done was exactly right. But the point was, without hesitation, they immediately spoke up and were able to say, "No, you're wrong." If they had done what I had said, we would have been out of position, because sure enough, a few minutes later, the SEAL team showed up, and we were right where we needed to be.
One of the things that I think is really fascinating that I've heard you say is that you don't see the performance measures of what you did on the ship and, best in the Navy and all the things that are talked about your experience nearly as impressive as what the people on the ship went on to do later. And the distinction I've heard you make is that you could get to those good performance measures by still using a command and control approach. And I was really interested in that, David, because I was extremely fortunate early on in my career that an organization I worked with had the rule that one of the performance measures of how good a leader you were was what happened to a location you were managing after you left. And they would look at the 3 to 4 months after you left your management position of how that place performed. And so it was fascinating to me that you zeroed in on that too, of what happened after you left the ship. Tell us more about that.
Well, that's really super powerful, and I'm glad your organization did that. I get people tell me all the time, "I want my people to think long term." And I said, "Okay, fine. Giving them evaluation, do exactly that. Evaluate them on their location 6 months or a year after they leave." "Oh, that's not fair. They're not there." I said, "Well, you want them, while they're there, they should be thinking about how to," I call it embedding whatever greatness they have in the people and the practices and the processes of the system, rather than keeping it in their own personality. And we all know the leader, and we saw this in the Navy a lot, right? Some guy's there, submarine doing great, he leaves, submarine starts doing poorly, and we say, "Oh, gee, we really miss Jack. Jack's such a great leader." And I was like, "No, yeah, Jack was a great achiever. He's a great submarine driver, but he wasn't a leader, because had he been a leader, the ship would have continued to do well." And so I didn't write the book until 10 years after I left, because I didn't realize the story, because, yeah, you had this turnaround, but, we see those books all the time on the shelf. And, but what happened was we ended up creating 10 submarine commanders from the crew that was served with me. And it took time for that to happen and for me to realize that. And I said, that's really the story. So we're going to use the turnaround as the hook. But the real story is, by doing this, by treating people like leaders, you build more leaders. It's a long-term thing, and a lot of guys don't have the patience for it. A lot of organizations are hung up on quarterly earnings or, whatever they have. They can't tolerate the patience to build leaders.
Well, and just so the significance of that isn't lost for people who aren't as familiar with how the Navy works is, to get a command of a Navy ship is a big deal. And how many officers on a submarine? There's only like 14 or 15, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So 10 of them went on to take their own command. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think the average is about 2.5. So to have 10 is really a highly disproportionate number. It's really way outside the outlier.
David, one of the things we've talked around in this conversation is the necessity for a leader to really be, if not maybe enthusiastic, at least willing to give up control. And that's a big obstacle for a lot of us. I know it's an obstacle for me. You've talked about how it's an obstacle for you. So one of the things I'd love to know from you is, what are some of the strategies, regardless of if it's commanding a ship, running a business, managing a nonprofit? And I think a lot of people buy into this and they say, okay, that makes sense. I want to push authority down to the people who've got the information. But how do we get over ourselves? What are some of the things we can do to just give up control a little bit?
Well, the good news is you carry the same brain with you all day long. So you can train it. So the training that you do will carry over into work. The concept is called act your way to new thinking, not think your way to new action. So the idea is you do something that rewires your brain, like for us, like saying, here's one. Next time you go out to dinner, tell the waiter or the waitress, hey, you pick for me, and don't play it safe. And then see what you get. Now, if you don't eat beef, fine. You can put restrictions on and say, I don't eat beef, but other than that, you pick my meal for me. And a lot of people, that's going to bring up anxiety and, well, what are you, it's just dinner, right? I'm guessing you'll survive. And if it's no good, go home and, make a bowl of soup. But it's great. And it's really interesting what happens. It's interesting what happens with the wait staff. I tried doing this a lot. And we see a whole range of reactions, and these are the same reactions you're going to get at work. If that seems too easy, then just amp it up. Just, let your spouse pick the restaurant or pick the show or pick your next car. I mean, there are all kinds of ways. Every time you got to make a decision in your personal life, if you can practice giving up control there, the same sort of feelings of anxiety are going to happen at work. The only thing is, you'll know you're on the right track. You go, oh, this is how it's supposed to feel. This is how it's supposed to feel, right? I'm not sure that it ever feels, quote, good, but at least you know you're on the right track.
I love that way of thinking of it. You take your brain everywhere with you. So if you get comfortable, or at least more comfortable in one place, that same sort of orientation can migrate everywhere else. I mean, it's obvious in some ways, but just the act of doing it makes it so much different.
Right. We're really enthusiastic about this idea of acting your way to new thinking. And the same thing with the team. There's a lot of work now that shows that your brain controls your physical body, but your physical body also can rewire your brain. We call them nudges, and people can sign up for them, but you can come up with activities to be, let's say you want to be more collaborative or more empathetic. You can come up with activities that will train your brain to be that way.
I love it. I love it. So you've got the book, Turn the Ship Around, but you mentioned just a moment ago the nudges, and this is something that I was really captivated by when I went on your website. I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about those, and that is a starting point for starting to do some of these things we've talked about, and how would be the best way for people to engage with that.
Yes, we put these nudges out. You can enroll in them. You have the opportunity to enroll. They're little 1-minute videos. Typically it's me, and I give little tips for generally how to give up control, or just talking about one of these concepts. Push authority to information, not information to authority. Be a know-all but tell-not leader, not a know-all, tell-all leader. And you go to my website, David Marquet, MARQUET.com, and right there on the homepage, there's a little sign-up form, and you enroll, and we send them to you every Wednesday morning.
David Marquet is the author of the book Turn the Ship Around and former captain of the USS Santa Fe. David, thanks a ton for not only what you did during your time in the Navy, but just as importantly, the leadership lessons you're sharing with people today. And I know it's been so helpful to so many, and I hope folks will check out your work.
Cheers. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me on your show.
The interview you just heard was recorded about a month ago, and I'm recording this now as it's airing the same week. And in the intervening time, I was really intrigued by this concept of going out to a restaurant and giving up control of what you're going to eat. And so I decided I would try that a few times. And I can remember on 3 occasions doing this where I let go of control in some way. 2 of the times, I just said to the server, surprise me. And what ended up happening in both of the first 2 situations is we ended up getting served. One case I was with someone else. We were ordering, sharing a plate. We ended up getting the most safe thing on the menu. It's the best way I could describe it. It was something I'd probably order anyway, and I'm sure was one of the most popular dishes. And in both cases, I got the sense that the server was playing it safe and didn't want to potentially upset me by not having a good meal, even though that was what I was asking for. So I thought that was really interesting of how we all tend to play it safe, even on the opposite side too. And on the 3rd occasion, though, that I did this, it was something really, really interesting happened. So I was having lunch with a buddy of mine, Ryan Williams, and he's going to be on the show actually in a couple months. And we met up in LA, and he suggested a couple places because we were meeting closer to him. And his first suggestion on his email to me was a sushi place. Now, I know, I'm supposed to love sushi living in Southern California. That's supposed to be the hip, cool thing to do. It's just not a thing for me. I'm not a big sushi fan. I've done it a couple of times. I just don't love it. And so, but that was the first thing on his list. He said, let's go here, but if you don't like sushi, you can go here. And I emailed him back, and I was thinking about this interview, and I said, all right, let's go to do sushi. I'm not a huge fan of sushi, but that's exactly why we should go do it. And so we went, and he ordered for me, and it was great. Complete giving up control, right? And so we had the meal, and it was all right. It was better than I expected, actually. And so, but what was really interesting is we sat at the sushi bar, and we sat down, and the guy sitting next to us, we struck up a conversation. We started talking, and Ryan has a podcast too, so we started talking about podcasting and media, and turns out he teaches, and so he was talking about how he might bring podcasting into his classroom and use media more effectively. And so we had a really nice conversation. Super nice guy. And we talked for 10 or 15 minutes, and he got up and left. He had someone else with him. And Ryan turned to me and he said, do you know who that is? And I said, no. Well, Ryan told me, and it turns out, I looked him up later, he's an Academy Award nominated director. Just sitting at lunch, had a 10 or 15 minute chat with him. Super nice guy. And I was thinking about that walking out of the restaurant that day, that I ended up in a situation having a conversation with someone who's, really well known in a field that I would never have normally had if I had just stuck with the control that I normally like to have. Don't think I didn't see that Chipotle going into the shopping center and the sushi place, by the way, too. I was looking at it. But it was so fun to get to do something totally outside my comfort zone. I wonder if you would try the same. Maybe it's at a restaurant, or maybe there's another place that you can let go of a little bit of control this week and just see what happens. See what kind of conversations you have. See what people come back to you with. And if you do, and you find something interesting that happens, I'd love to hear about it. Drop us a line. coachingforleaders.com/241 is the notes for this episode. By the way, always love to get your comments, questions, or feedback for the next Q&A shows. That's at coachingforleaders.com/feedback, and we'll consider your question for a future show. Now, if you aren't already subscribed to get my weekly leadership guides on Wednesdays, you want to do that because you'll get the notes for the episode each week in your inbox on Wednesday. It's got the photo of the guest, a quote, it's got the link to the show notes, and it also has a whole bunch of things that I think will be helpful for you to listen to watch, to read. So each week you get a list of those things in your box, all comes in one message. If you haven't already joined the leadership guide, it's a great way to keep up on your reading and your listening and your development between shows. And if you haven't yet joined that, go over to coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. And when you do, you'll also get access to my reader's guide that lists the 10 leadership books that will help you to get better results from others. It's an 11-page guide and a 9-minute video overviewing all of those books. So again, you can get that at coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. If you haven't already jumped onto that, do that so you get the weekly leadership guides. I'd love to include you as well. Finally, this week, thank you so much to Melissa down in Australia. Thank you for the kind review on iTunes. Melissa mentioned she really enjoyed the conversation a few episodes ago with Michael Bungay-Stanier, one of the top coaches in the world, and also a fellow Australian. So greetings to you, Melissa, and all of our listeners in Australia. We actually have so many listeners in Australia, and thank you for all of you who listen. I'm so grateful. Hey, I hope you found today's conversation helpful. Go out this week and find something you can do to turn followers into leaders. Have a great week, and I look forward to talking with you on next week's episode. Take care.